The title of this is a reassessment. I've got to say, what a week it's been this last week or so, the 70th anniversary, and it's just been incredible, the response to it. I mean, I'm absolutely gobsmacked. I'm sure Johnny and Mary in the front row over there are. I've done a number of talks about the Dambusters, but I've never done one with a Dambuster sitting in front of me, and nor have I done one with Barnes Wallis's daughter sitting in front of me. So I'm feeling slightly daunted about that. And I slightly feel that Johnny probably knows a little bit about what I'm going to say. But Johnny, bear with me, please. The assessment bit. Well, I'm going to divide this into three parts. I'm sure this doesn't apply to you learned folk here in Howden, but I think for most people, what most people know about the Dams Raid does go back to the 1955 film, and a jolly good film it was too. I love it, and I love the music, and I love everything about it. However, what I discovered when I started doing my research on this subject was that actually it's a more remarkable raid than I had first thought, and a more exciting, more thrilling, more dramatic raid with more far-reaching results than perhaps has been given credit. And so there's three areas that I want to kind of try and rattle through in the next 25 minutes. And the first part of that is the politics behind it. And it seems to me remarkable that this raid ever took place at all. And I want to go back to January the 28th, 1943. And although this is a still you've got up on the screen, in Vicar's house in London, Southwest 1, I think it was, so not far from the Houses of Parliament, a screening was going on with a number of bigwigs there, not least the head of Vicar's Aviation. And a tall man with rapidly whitening hair was showing on a little projector a film. And what they saw was this Wellington that you see on the screen at the moment, going down in a sort of grainy black and white footage film, going down the Fleet, the other side of Chesil Beach on the south coast in Dorset, and dropping this dark sphere which splashed into the water, bounced once, twice, three times, and on for some 1,200 yards, 3/4 of a mile. And to say that everyone was impressed is something of an understatement. Everyone thought this was nothing short of a miracle weapon, a miracle new device. A big bomb that bounces on water. How extraordinary is that? A few days later, the tall white-haired man, who of course was none other than Barnes Wallis, Mary's father, and obviously known to you all up here in the old days when he was working at Howden on the airships, he was the inventor of it, and he showed it to other people in the next few days, people from the Ministry of Aircraft Production, people from the Air Ministry, and again the response was pretty positive. And at that point, Barnes Wallis had high hopes that this would lead to something. And what he had in mind, and he brought out he showed his film in conjunction with a paper he'd done on air attack on dams. What he had in mind was a very quick decision, because his bouncing bomb, although originally designed as an anti-shipping weapon, he had realised could be used for a bigger role, which was to destroy the large German dams, the Mörner and the Eder, particularly these gravity dams. And the Mörner, of course, fed water into the Ruhr industrial area, the heartland of the Nazi war machine. But he had a problem because time was running out. And he knew that what you had to do with this bomb was it had to hit the face of the dam, then sink to a certain depth, and then explode. And it's the combination of the earthquake effect of the explosion combined with the pressure of the water above that would break the dam, potentially. But it needed a certain level of water above it for that to happen. And after about June, that water level in those dams would get too low and it would become impossible. Now, we also recognised that for this trip to be successful, he had to do it while there was a full moon, and that really meant doing it by, effectively, the 26th of May, and it was now the beginning of February. Time was running out, and although he had his prototype, he hadn't actually invented the bomb, the upkeep, as it was called, that would be delivered on the dams. So he was a man in a hurry. He was someone who wanted to get this decision made, and this decision made quickly. But of course, anything that needs to be made, a decision that needs to be made quickly, when really there's lots of things still to sort out, that makes the decision making less likely. One of the people who was slightly standing on the fence here was the Controller of Research and Development at the Ministry of Aircraft Production. And this was a chap called Air Vice Marshal Francis Linnell, who's this gentleman here. Now, Linnell was also overseeing Vickers Aviation's potential new bomber, the Windsor, another 4-engine, high-altitude, pressurised cabin bomber. And he didn't really want too many distractions from that. He was also very, very good mates with Arthur Harris, who was Commander-in-Chief and had been since February the previous year of Bomber Command. And he was an old colleague of Harris's, and he knew that this was exactly the sort of project that Harris had no truck with whatsoever. He called people like Barnes Wallis panacea mongers, i.e. people who were always hunting for that panacea, that quick answer and that quick fix, some miracle weapon that was somehow miraculously going to end the war in a trice. And he thought it was all bunkum. He thought it was incredibly unlikely, and there was only one way to protract a strategic air campaign to win the war, and that was by heavy bombing, area bombing. And indeed, his briefings from his chiefs at the Air Ministry, and of course from Portal, the Chief of the Air Staff, had all been to that end, i.e. you are to carry out strategic air campaign of area bombing against Germany, to defeat both the morale and also the infrastructure of the German Reich. That was his mission, and he'd been preparing for this for the best part of a year since he'd taken over command. And in that time, this had been a slightly fraught time for Harris, because he'd had to oversee the development of a heavy bomber force. Lancaster's only just came into operation in the beginning of 1942, and these things take time to build up. On top of that, he had to lose a whole number of airfields to the Americans when they started coming over and building up the US 8th Air Force from the summer of 1942 onwards. He had to develop improved navigation aids, and these were coming in the form of oboe and H2S. He had to build up his force completely, and only by the beginning of February was he satisfied that he was ready for this, what he termed his all-out offensive, and the object of his all-out offensive to start off with was going to be the Ruhr industrial heartland, and he was planning to start this in March. Finally, at this time of year, after a long, long time of preparation, of frustrations, of getting ready, of trying to change the attitudes of the British public, and indeed Britain's war leaders, did he feel finally ready. And also, he was also very, very sceptical of any other ways of doing it. What he felt was the right way of doing things was to send over large formations of bombers, well, not formations, large streams of bombers, flying over at sort of 18,000 feet plus and dropping bombs on a particular target. And frankly, if you got within a mile of the target, you were doing pretty well. What he was much more sceptical about was any kind of low-level specific precision raids. And the last time this had been tried at a very low level was the Augsburg Raid in April 1942. The whole thing had been a bit of a disaster, and only 7 out of the 12 Lancasters that had been sent over had actually made it back. And here's some of them being mashed up on their way out to Augsburg. And also, although his Lancaster force was building up, the numbers were still pretty small. There was only around about 200 by this time, which is not that very many. Now it was increasing rapidly. It was starting as mass production of Lancasters was starting to kick in. That force was rising and rising and rising, but it was still pretty low at that stage. So, any diversion of those resources, again, was something he was not going to be interested in at all. Now, on the 13th on the 12th of February, having shown his film a number of times, Barnes Wallis then rings up Linnell and goes, "Look, come on, you've seen this film. Everyone was being very positive about it. What on earth's going on? Why aren't you kind of pushing this?" And Linnell hedged his bets and said, "Well, there's the Windsor and, there's other things and, I'm not sure that we can do it. How feasible is it? I mean, we're all agreed the weapon's amazing, but, the time constraints, etc., etc." And he was a bit lukewarm about it. But he said, "But what I'm going to do is I'm going to organise a meeting with some people from the Air Ministry, from people from the MAP, the Ministry of Aircraft Production. We'll have a chat about it and see about its feasibility." That happens on the 13th of February. And one of the people there is a chap called Group Captain Sidney Bufton. Now, Bufton is the deputy of bomber operations at the Air Ministry. And he and Harris do not like each other one little bit. Not least because the previous August, Bufton has got one over Harris by outmanoeuvring him on the question of pathfinders, the idea that the elite squadron or elite force would go over ahead of a bomber stream and drop flares to improve the marking. And Harris instinctively did not like this idea of an elite squadron, but he got outmanoeuvred, Bufton got his way, pathfinders came into being. And this was all, how Harris viewed it was this was all symptomatic of people below him in rank from Whitehall in London telling him at Bomber Command headquarters and Air Marshal what to do, and he didn't like it a bit. On the 15th of February, however, Bufton decides that actually there is some scope for this, and he starts talking about recommending that 30 Lancasters be withdrawn from Bomber Command specifically, or not from, but from main operations in Bomber Command, for carrying out this potential operation against the dams with the bouncing bomb. And at this point, Linnell rings up and puts Harris in the picture. And Harris just dismisses it out of hand and immediately says, this is tripe of the highest order. However, he then discovers that that these 30 Lancasters are likely to be withdrawn from his bomber force, and it's now only a couple of weeks away from his all-out offensive, which he's been preparing for a year. And at this point, he explodes. And so he writes to Portal, Chief of the Air Staff, and this is the letter. And he thinks that this is going to be the end of the matter. And basically, he says, these panacea mongers are all absolute lunatics. This one is the crankiest idea of all. I bet my shirt that nothing will ever come of it. By all means, give them a Lancaster or two to play with while us real boys go and do the proper war. But let's draw a line of it, and I don't want to hear anything more about it. Is that okay with you, sir? And he expects at that point that that is going to be the end of the matter. What he doesn't realise, however, is that back on the 12th of February, after Barnes Wallis has had his rather discouraging talk with Air Vice Marshal Linnell at the Ministry of Aircraft Production, he then rings up his old pal Frederick Winterbottom, who is a spook. He's a member of the Secret Intelligence Service, heads up the intelligence section, air intelligence at the within the SIS. And he also, coincidentally, has one of the best address books in London. He knows how to get to people. He knows how to speak to the right people. And Barnes Wallis writes a letter to him saying, look, it's really disappointing. I mean, it's a terrible response. Can you kind of beef them up? And he signs off. The last 3 words on this letter in ink at the end of this tight letter are, help, oh, help. In other words, you're my last card. Fred Winterbottom does not disappoint at all. He sends this letter to one of the assistant chiefs of the air staff, a chap called Air Vice Marshal Inglis. And it is just a masterpiece of Machiavellian guile and suggestion. And basically, he implies in this letter that the top brass at the Air Ministry really ought to know about this weapon. He suggests that the Admiralty have been much more supportive and about to get one over the RAF. He also suggests that he's absolutely certain that the Chief of the Air Staff would want to know about this weapon because it's so completely brilliant. And what he's intending is that English will show the film and report back to Portal about all this. And that is precisely what happens. And this is Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Charles Portal. And the interesting thing as you go up in the chain of command is that the higher you go up in command, the fewer decisions, big decisions you have to make. But the more important those big decisions are. And this is a classic example. He replies back to Harris a couple of days later and says, absolutely take your point, Bert, completely see where you're coming from. However, I happen to think this is worth a punt. And so they find themselves in this incredible situation on the 26th of February, when Wallis has just a few days before reached his nadir. He's been warned off, told to back off and stop meddling and getting in the way. Suddenly this meeting is convened and the situation, the project, codenamed Operation Chastise as it's to become, attack on the dams with his weapon, is all on it. It's been given the green light. And I often wonder what it must have been like being him at that moment, at the end of that meeting on the afternoon of the 26th of February, Friday I think it was, as he stepped back out onto Millbank opposite the Houses of Parliament. You know, what would he have been thinking? For so long he'd believed in this weapons. For so long he'd been pushing and trying to win people over to the possibilities of this plan. And now everyone had said, OK, fine, go crack on. And what was he thinking? Because at that time, the bomb hadn't been made. The prototype had, but not the bigger upkeep. Yes, a Lancaster could, in theory, carry it, but a Lancaster was made by A.V. Roe up in Woodford in Manchester, and Barnes Wallis was assistant chief designer at Vickers Aviation down in Weybridge. They're kind of, you know, they're all in it together. We're all in the same war, but they are rival firms. Would Barnes Wallis and Roy Chadwick, the designer of the Lancaster, who would have to modify a Lancaster quite a lot to carry this weapon, would they get on? Would they be able to cooperate? Would they be able to train a squadron in that time? I mean, these are all big questions, huge ifs and buts. I mean, the opportunities for things to go wrong were enormous. And that's before you even formed the squadron and trained it, which for me is the next really big, remarkable thing about the raid. That's Roy Chadwick. And fortunately, Barnes Wallis and he did get on very well. Fortunately, they were able to do preliminary designs of the upkeep in record time, in a couple of days, and things started to develop. But it wasn't until the 23rd of March that 617 Squadron comes into being, the special squadron. The way it's done in the film is it's the sort of the Top Gun of Bomber Command. You know, Guy Gibson handpicked every single one of his crews. You know, not true. Guy Gibson only knew personally to any degree at all 3 of his pilots, and only a couple more. I mean, Mickey Martin he'd met once at an investiture for one of their gongs. Joe McCarthy he certainly knew about, Johnny's skipper, but I'm not sure there's no evidence that he had actually met him. Nor were these crews entirely experienced. Some of them had only done 4 operations. You know, they were supposed to be highly experienced crews, each and every one of them, and they just simply weren't, all of them, you know. So, and also it's one thing flying over at 18,000 feet in the dark and dropping bombs on Munich or something. It's quite another flying at very, very low level and dropping a bomb on it at sixpence. When they first get the green light, you know, Barnes Wallis reckons this bomb can be dropped at 150 feet. A few weeks into training, that's changed to 60 feet. Now, 60 feet is pretty darn low. I mean, the wingspan of a Lancaster is 102 feet. So suddenly to be dropping a bomb at 60 feet on a sixpence, I mean, is quite breathtaking. These are the routes. So you can see on this map all the different planes that came down on the 3 waves of the actual raid. I mean, only one live upkeep had been dropped before the raid. Not all of the crews, by any stretch of the imagination, had even dropped an inert upkeep. So lots of the crews were going out without any experience of dropping the upkeep at all. I mean, this is a very, very, very tall order. Hopgood's crew, for example, he goes in. There's Gibson and his crew setting off. And there are the dams they're going to attack, the Zorpa, the Myrna and the Ada. The Ada and the Myrna are 2 of the largest buildings in the whole of Germany. I mean, they're these vast structures, 202 cubic meters of water behind the Ada Dam. I mean, this is serious stuff. And there, I think, is, if I remember rightly, that is Hopgood's plane dropping the bomb. And, you know, he's Gibson's greatest mate from 106 Squadron days. And, you know, he has about the least experienced crew of everyone on that raid. Not in terms of operations, but in terms of training for this particular mission. And I'll give you 2 examples. John Fraser, the bomb aimer, he joined 617 Squadron on the 22nd of April. The mission itself is on the night of the 16th, 17th of May. He's been there a few days, and the whole squadron is given 48 hours leave. He comes back from leave and promptly catches impetigo, which puts him in hospital for 5 days. Now, I reckon by the time he gets on the raid, John Fraser, bomb aimer, this bomb that's got to be dropped on a sixpence, I reckon he's had about 5 days training, maybe 7 tops. You know, it's not a lot. and his navigator has only joined the squadron, I think, on the 30th of April. So again, you know, this is a crew that's not that experienced in terms of the training for that particular operation. Experienced men, all of them, yes, but not highly trained for this particular mission. And you know, going in after Gibson and after Mickey Martin, you know, when all the gunners have got their bead, you know, this is a big ask. Is it any wonder that plane gets shot down? And there you are. You can see the Myrna Dam, the only dam that's actually defended. But the next one, the Ada. Now this is just, I still can't get over how they managed to breach this dam. Three crews with upkeeps on this one. And you can see in the top of that picture there, the top right-hand corner, you can see that little circle. That is the Schloss Waldeck, the castle there. And what you have to do is come down the little gorge to the other side of that, just to the top of that, just to the sort of to the left of it. Come down, sweep over that spit, which only goes about 2/3 of a mile in front of it. You've got to do a 90-degree dogleg, then get yourself to 60 foot, and then drop your upkeep, rotating at 500 revolutions a minute. This is a 4-ton bomb. Now think of the gyro effect of that. You know, that bomb is rotating, 4 tons of it, rotating at 500 revolutions a minute. It wants to go that way. It doesn't want to go 90 degrees at all. When you turn 90 degrees in a Lancaster, you know, the wing dips 102 feet, this thing. You know, one side of it, you're almost touching the water. The other side, you've got those rising slopes and the trees. How did they do it? I mean, I went over with a guy at 500 feet in a Beech 18, which is a sort of roughly contemporary aircraft to a Lancaster, has the same twin tail plane. And the pilot said to me, he was a highly experienced pilot, at 500 feet, said to me, I don't know how they did that. That is flying of the highest caliber. It's still breathtaking. Les Knight's crew, the third and final upkeep, the one last chance to bake the Ada, they get it right, skips in, bounces, hits the wall, boom, it's all over. There you go. That amazing picture. Look how low it is. And also, I should just add, if you can see that, can you see this huge ridge to the right of the river and the dam? So you're then hurtling, so as you cross the dam, you're hurtling straight towards that hill. I mean, this is a really difficult, sorry, I was about to say something rude, really difficult ridge to get over, and you've got to bank sharp to starboard and get out of there. I mean, unbelievable, unbelievable. Really, really, truly amazing. This is the last bit that I want to talk about, and that is the legacy of the dams. If there's one thing that really, really gets on my nerves, it's the way over the last 30, 40 years, certain historians have had this kind of declinist, defeatist view about our war effort. They want to just sort of chip away at it, denigrate it. And this is applied to the dams raid. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, those guys were incredibly brave. But what did it achieve? Oh, it was a good PR coup to the Americans, but, you know, they rebuilt the dams in 5 months. I mean, it's breathtaking. I still can't understand how that has had any credibility whatsoever. Let's take those one by one. First of all, the PR thing. Yeah, sure, it was great. We had fantastic photographs, aerial photographs of the flooding, and I think did I put one in? Yes, I did. Flooding and the breached Myrna Dam, which was on the front page of every newspaper in the free world. And, okay, the second bit is, and it really showed the Americans what we were about. Let me tell you, in the spring of 1943, I just don't buy that at all. We didn't need to prove anything to the Americans. We just won, and okay, it was true, the Americans were involved, but it was a predominantly British-led joint effort in North Africa. That victory that was achieved on the 13th of May produced a bigger number of prisoners than had been lost to the Germans at Stalingrad just a few months before that. This was a massive deal. The victory in North Africa, the one area in which British forces have been fighting since pretty much the beginning of the war, or certainly since June 1940. You know, this was all over that entire campaign. The whole Mediterranean map looked completely different. It looked absolutely certain that any day now the Italians were going to come out of the war. You know, that Mussolini was going to be overthrown. This was a massive victory, and it was British idea and predominantly British led, even though there was a core of American troops there, 2 US US 2 Corps and various other, naval forces and air forces. That is true. But, we didn't need to impress the Americans at all at that point about our prowess or how we could make a difference in the war. So the next bit, and you can see the extent of the flood. And I think perhaps those pictures have actually done the raid a disservice because people have tended to focus on the flood rather than the other factors. Now, I'm sorry about the quality of this picture, but I want to include it because what you can see there is railway lines that have been built up to the face of the dam. And people always say, yes, but they were rebuilt in 5 months. But you've got to ask yourself, turn that question around. Why were they rebuilt in 5 months? They were rebuilt in 5 months because it was incredibly important for the Germans to do so. And they did this, which admittedly was an enormous feat of engineering and resources and, frankly, chutzpah to achieve that. But they did so at a time where the Germans and the Nazi command could least afford it. Let's think about this time. This is the summer of 1943. What happens in the summer of 1943, specifically July 1943? Two things happen. First of all, there is the Battle of Kursk. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, the Battle of the Kursk was the last time German forces went forward in the Soviet Union. It was a vast battle, always known as the biggest tank battle in history, although that is now being slightly questioned. But anyway, that's another point. A vast battle, and at the same time, well, what caused it to be called, Hitler to call off the offensive, was the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, which was and remains the largest seaborne invasion ever undertaken. And so you can imagine how bad it was for the Germans to be diverting vast amount of resources to rebuilding the dams. Why do they need to rebuild them by the autumn? Well, it's simple. They're not going to be short of water in the summer of 1943, but if they haven't rebuilt them in time to catch the winter rains of 43, 44, they're certainly going to be in big trouble by the summer of 1943. There's a further reason for this, and that is that, as I mentioned earlier, these two dams, the Mörner and the Eder, are two of the best known, biggest edifices in all of Nazi Germany. The Greater Reich. Every German would have known about these. It's a bit like destroying Big Ben and Tower Bridge or something. It's just unacceptable to leave these structures with huge, great holes in them. People also bemoan the fact that the Sorpe wasn't completely destroyed. Johnny managed to get an absolute bullseye on that one, this third dam, and it's true that the upkeep wasn't specifically designed to attack that type of earthen dam, which is a different construction to those of the Eder and the Mörner. However, the Sorpe also had to be completely emptied before it could be repaired. It's a huge pain for the Germans. So here, and if you don't believe me, look at these pictures. Look at that. That's just one of the dams. Okay, you've got to build all that. Huge barrack blocks, diversion of. Look at that. I mean, isn't that just the most astonishing picture? Look at that scaffolding. It's quite extraordinary. And there you are. You can see another picture of the reconstruction. Now, some 70,000 workers were brought over into this area to help with the reconstruction process. Some between 7,000 and 20,000 redirected from the Atlantic Wall. And it's very interesting, I think, that on the 6th of June 1944, there were some 47 heavy guns along the Normandy invasion front. A mere 47. Quite a lot if you're on Omaha or landing on Omaha or wherever. But even so, not many in the big scheme of things. Not compared to Nazi Germany in the summer of 1944, where there are 15,000 heavy guns in Germany. And on top of this, of course, every single dam, not just these dams, have to have, because something like this happening is ever again is completely unthinkable, they have to have vast amounts of anti-aircraft defences. So not just torpedo nets, but also huge 100-metre high nets that stretch across into the air horizontally in front of the dams, all sorts of other things, more guns, more protection. And this is not just on the Mörner and the Eder and the Sorpe, but every single dam in Germany. The headache to the Germans is colossal. And there is one last advantage of this, and that is, while it's a good PR coup for us, it's an incredibly bad PR coup for the Germans. Not least because the panacea that I mentioned that Harris hates so much is the one aircraft, one bomb. That obviously happens with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but what this raid shows is that technology is getting us a lot closer to that moment. And that's being delivered by the RAF and specifically Bomber Command. And that gives the Germans a massive, massive jolt. Oh yes, a bit more scaffolding. Yep, got to the end. Those are my 3 areas of big reassessment. Thank you.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.